Hello everyone, and welcome to this series on how to enhance our code review experience. In this third video, we will see what we should always consider every time we're about to start a new implementation, whether for a user story or bug fix, big or small, and during that implementation. Always start by carefully considering the design and architecture of some code changes before you even start writing the first line of code. Discuss with your colleagues, with the senior engineers, the architects, and agree together about which technical path you will follow during the implementation. After doing this, the coding can start. This will resolve a majority of situations in code review, which happens much later in the development process, where people say, "Oh no, my code review is taking ages. Oh no, I'm being told to do it all over again." That's probably because the design and architecture of those code changes were not properly considered at the beginning. You have to organize your implementation in a way that will reduce the cognitive load that you put on the reviewer's mind. How can you do that? By following two best practices that are kind of linked together. The first one is to keep all your PRs as small as possible. When you have a small PR, it's easier to review, smoother and faster, and that's exactly what we want. There will be less opportunities for context switching on the reviewer's end, like starting the review and then going to a meeting, and then that's the end of the day, so we end up losing a lot of time. Small PRs will avoid this. They will also make your deliveries more atomic. They will be easier to review, to integrate, and to investigate and revert if they unfortunately introduced a regression, which is bound to happen at some point. Another big advantage is that there will be less risks of conflicts with other PRs. The bigger a PR is, the longer it stays open, the more chances it will have of facing conflicts, and resolving them is purely wasted time for everyone. How can you keep a PR small? One way is to make sure that it only has one single purpose, one single objective. This will make it much easier to understand and to focus on by the reviewer, so their review will be more qualitative, which is exactly what you want as an author. So how can you keep each PR small and dedicated with one single purpose? You can organize and split your implementation by following a cascading or stacked branches strategy. This is applicable to any kind of project or code base. In Agile, when you have a big feature that you need to do over several iterations, you will have to split it in as many small user stories as you need to, so that each one of them fits in a single iteration and brings some value. For the implementation of one user story or bug fix, that's exactly the same. You will split it in as many branches and associated PRs as you need to, each of them cascading or inheriting from each other, so that you end up with several small and dedicated PRs. Here is an example. I had this user story to implement, and after agreeing on the code design and architecture with my colleagues, I decided to split it in three parts. Part 1 targeting main or master branch, Part 2 targeting Part 1, and Part 3 targeting Part 2. Doing this forces you to think about your implementation in advance in order to organize and split it in a meaningful and practical way, which is very good because it also forces you to consider from the beginning the design and architecture of these code changes. Here are some studies about the impacts of large PRs on the code review time. Don't focus on the graph details, just look at the trends. This study is from the graphite company, over 1.5 million of their PRs. On the horizontal axis, we have the size of a PR, and on the vertical axis, we have the time taken to review it. What we could naively expect is that there should be some kind of linear growth. The bigger a PR is, the longer it takes to review it. However, what we actually observe is that at some point, when the PR gets too big, there is some kind of mindset shift on the reviewer's end. It's just too big, too exhausting, and time-consuming, and they abandon. They shift from a detailed, qualitative, and meaningful review to a broad scope and high-level only review, where we lose a lot of quality and usefulness. Another study from the Amadeus company on 30,000 of their PRs. We will focus on the left part of this graph. In blue, we have the chances of merging the PR within the first week. In green, the amount of comments received, and in red, the chances to revert it, because it introduced a regression. What we clearly see is that small PRs are merged fast while still receiving a good amount of comments and not introducing many regressions. So keep all your PRs small and focused. Now that you started the implementation, there are many best practices and principles that you can follow as a software engineer. However, there is one of them that I want to remind you and that I carefully followed throughout all my career. Keep your work simple and stupid. Do not over-engineer your solution and try to anticipate everything that might happen in the future. Only produce code that is useful now, that brings value now. What might be needed later, just do it later, when and if it will actually be needed, because requirements change fast. Last advice during the implementation. Never hesitate to ask for early feedback. Let your colleagues help you and confirm that you are still going in the right technical direction that you all agreed upon at the beginning. It's particularly valid if you're working on some sensitive changes. For instance, if you're touching the login flow of your application. If you break it, nothing else matters. So you want to make sure that you're doing these changes properly and as agreed. During the implementation, you can use a draft PR if that's available in your tool, or just some simple prefixes on the PR title. To be continued in the next video. As an author, what should you consider when you're about to ask for a code review? Thanks for watching.